Future flashpoints. Rare minerals, food and water, arable land, air cleansing forests, in the intellectual heart of the American military and policy-making world. These are emerging, not just as environmental issues, but as the potential stuff of conflict in the 21st century. A new field of systematic study is opening within research centers, the Pentagon, and intelligence institutions. It assumes that the 21st century will be shaped not just by competitive economic growth, but also by potentially disruptive scarcities, depletion of minerals, desertification of land, pollution or overuse of water, weather changes that kill fish and farms. National security experts have begun to label such factors threats to national security and to study them, often alongside environmental or advocacy groups. A basic question frames their thinking. What are the new relationships among resources, diplomacy, crisis, and conflict? A hint of the complexity can be seen along the Afghanistan-Pakistan border. A war against terrorists seems, at first, to have little to do with resources. But look again. This fall, outraged Pakistani gangs at the border were torching fuel trucks that carried supplies vital to Allied troops. And at the end of that supply line, American planning was a small step ahead. A few Marines were trying out new tech solar collectors to cut their dependence on diesel fuel. Strategists also knew that there were other stakes in the outcome. Afghanistan has been seen for decades as a potential route for pipelines carrying Central Asian gas, but only if there is peace. And underground lie huge deposits of riches like lithium, which is crucial to batteries for electronic devices. China, in particular, has a large interest in those. The National Intelligence Council has a major effort underway to analyze threats from water and food shortages related to climate change and other environmental causes. One senior American intelligence official said, "National security officials are careful to say that resources are only one factor in the development of conflicts. How politics and diplomacy shape relationships is, in the end, decisive. But these can be a trigger of instability," said one senior American intelligence official, whose job forbids him to speak for attribution. They cause the magnification of other issues. Last summer, for example, flooding that uprooted millions of Pakistanis stirred fear in Washington that militant movements might prove more adept than Pakistan's weak government at delivering aid. Last month, the advocacy group Refugees International reported that the Pakistani army did respond effectively, but that civilian authorities struggled, and American and international agencies should be better prepared for climate-related calamities. And the issues are so complex, the number of actors and the uncertainties are very high. So, the analysis is still speculative. It makes planning much harder and preventive action very difficult. National security risks take many forms, and here are some scenarios. China is buying mineral concessions across Asia, Africa, and Latin America. It has harassed foreign aircraft and ships to assert itself beyond the accepted 12-mile limit in the South China Sea, whose bed is thought to be rich in rare metals. China has risen in less than 40 years from a symbol of underdevelopment to the world's number 2 economy, and the transformation has left a vast gulf between rich and poor. Its leaders' greatest fear is political instability, so it seeks rapid growth to spread the benefits of the new wealth. But its ferocious appetite for minerals has at times set it at odds with the West over policies toward countries like Sudan and Iran, whose oil it buys. China also has long-standing unresolved claims to islands nearby, and recently it hinted at withholding exports of rare earth minerals to get Japan to release a Chinese fishing captain who had been captured in disputed waters. The Chinese look at the most important thing to keep that growth going, and it is natural resources, said Vice Admiral Doug Crowder, a former commander of Navy forces in the Western Pacific and Indian Ocean, Yemen, and the Horn of Africa. Warships from more than a half-dozen nations on the lookout for pirates from Somalia now ply shipping lanes that carry one-third of the world's fuel supply around the Horn of Africa. Meanwhile, in nearby Yemen, terrorist plots inspired by Al-Qaeda have emerged. Both problems are usually traced to weak governments and lawlessness. Less appreciated is the role that changes in climate have played in the disintegration of political authority. Many Somalian pirates or fishermen who can no longer make a living in waters depleted by overfishing. Meanwhile, arable land and water supplies have been drying up, increasing poverty and driving farmers off the land. These shifts have only fed civil conflict and warlordism. Desertification, disorder, and weak government also plague Yemen. These trends feed cycles of violence, instability, and conflict, said one intelligence officer who calls the trends a recipe for a failing state. It was in Yemen that a Navy destroyer, the Cole, was attacked by Al-Qaeda in 1998, and where terror cells that swear allegiance to the bin Laden network have since set up shop. Secret diplomatic cables released by WikiLeaks refer to American Yemeni efforts to attack the cells. The Niger Delta. Nigeria, rich in resources, has Africa's second largest economy, but it suffers from political, ethnic, and religious divisions that routinely erupt in violence. Civilians have replaced military rule, but have not kept promises to share the land's oil and mineral wealth equitably by ending corruption. Nigeria is a major oil exporter, but half its people are without electricity. Oil and gas operations are centered in the ecologically delicate Niger Delta, which has long been lawless. Rebels sabotage foreign oil operations. Local residents tap into pipelines to steal fuel, and the companies have let aging infrastructure deteriorate, all of which feed intense pollution that threatens fishing and other livelihoods. Amnesty International has reported on the Delta as a calamity zone for human rights, breeding conflict. The International Crisis Group cites it as a flashpoint for violence. In a coming book from the Council on Foreign Relations, Nigeria, Dancing on the Brink, former ambassador John Campbell writes, residents of the Delta have benefited little from the oil industry. The region is a byword for misgovernment and corruption at all levels. A new frontier, the Arctic. In 2007, Russia sent 2 mini-subs to the seabed, 2.5 miles under the North Pole, to plant its flag. A move that, however symbolic, points to new rivalries over its potential riches. Canada, Denmark, Norway, and the United States also have territory in the Arctic Circle, and international conventions entitle them to economic zones within 200 miles of their borders. But Russia claims, without international support so far. But the seabed is an extension of its continental shelf, and Denmark has begun looking at the shelf off its territory in Greenland. Russia has already used its oil and gas exports as instruments of state power in dealing with other former Soviet republics. Now, how the seabed would be divided, managed, or protected promises to be a subject of dispute with other Arctic nations, presumably to be settled by new treaties or conventions. Meanwhile, changing ecosystems threaten Arctic fishing industries. This could become a geopolitical dispute as dwindling global fish stocks squeeze an already suffering industry, according to a study, Sustaining Security, How Natural Resources Influence National Security, by the Center for a New American Security. The air we breathe. Even as periodic international conferences fail to achieve consensus on how to address global warming, or whatever have you call it, one modest success story points to a different path. A single nation, acting in the common interest, can accomplish a lot. Research analysts in Washington agree with State Department assessments that such progress is evident in Brazil. The Amazon is Earth's largest oxygen replenishing rainforest, a source of pharmaceuticals and strategic minerals that is rich in biodiversity. But well into the 1980s, deforestation to exploit timber and expand farming was proceeding at an alarming rate. Then Brazil's politics shifted enough to allow new environmental laws and policies. Even in a society with huge disparities of wealth and poverty, Brazil had advantages that gave it flexibility to act. A stable democracy, vigorous development, offshore oil resources, and no external enemies. Since 2004, deforestation has slowed dramatically, and now global experts give Brazil's leaders high marks for environmental stewardship. Brazil is a major emerging economic powerhouse, which is going to give it all kinds of influence. It is producing more food, but using less acreage. It wraps managing natural resources into the elements of managing the country. And yes, these are more signs of the times. Potential future flashpoints. And everything is connected. And everything that must change quickly or rapidly, and for the better. Yes, it's time, because there is a spiritual side to things too. Because it's about what kind of world are we leaving to the future generations. Mark chapter 4, verse 21. And Jesus said unto them, Is a candle brought to be put under a bushel or under a bed, and not to be set on a candlestick? 22. For there is nothing hid which should not be manifested, neither was anything kept secret, but that it should come abroad. 23. If any human have ears to hear, let him hear. 24. And he said unto them, Take heed what you hear. With what measure you mete out, it shall be measured to you, and unto you that hear shall more be given. 25. For he that has, to him shall be given, and he that has not, from him shall be taken even that which he has. 26. And he said, So is the kingdom of God, as if a human should cast seed into the ground. 27. And should sleep, and rise night and day, and the seed should spring and grow up, he knows not how. 28. For the earth brings forth fruit of herself, first the blade, then the ear, after that the full corn in the ear. 29. But when the fruit is brought forth, immediately he puts in the sickle, because the harvest is come. 30. And he said, Whereunto shall we liken the kingdom of God, or with what comparison shall we compare it? 31. It is like a grain of mustard seed, which, when it is sown in the earth, is less than all the seeds that be in the earth. 32. But when it is sown, it grows up, and becomes greater than all herbs, and shoots out great branches, so that the birds of the air may lodge under the shadow of it. Revelation chapter 10, verse 4. And when the 7 thunders had uttered their voices, I was about to write, and I heard a voice from heaven, saying unto me, Seal up those things which the 7 thunders uttered, and write them not. 5. And the angel which I saw stand upon the sea and upon the earth lifted up his hand to heaven. 6. And swore by him that lives for ever and ever, who created heaven and the things that therein are, and the earth and the things that therein are, and the sea, the things which are therein, but there should be time no longer. 7. But in the days of the voice of the 7th angel, when he shall begin to sound, the mystery of God should be finished, as he has declared to his servants the prophets. And yes, again, it's time for all prophecy to be fulfilled. And these are more signs of the end times, transition days, which is a continuing day-by-day process. And there are many kinds of signs happening all around the world.